Firstly, let's start with a statement from a waitress at TGI Fridays. The following statement is from Linda Wolfe, dated the 11th of December 1995. I've worked as a waitress at TGI Fridays restaurant situated at Lakeside Shopping Centre complex in West Thurrock since April this year. My work entails the taking of orders and serving of food and drink to customers who attend the restaurant. TGI's is an American-themed burger and steak restaurant and also has a large bar centred within the premises. There are a large number of staff members and we all know each other as we spend so much time working at the restaurant. On Wednesday the 6th of December 1995, I started a day shift at work and arrived at 10 AM. I would normally work until 6 PM. It is normally fairly quiet during the day and only starts to get busy in the evening. On this day I had 5 tables to cover. I cannot be precise with the time, but around 1 PM in the afternoon, 4 men were seated at one of my allocated tables, table number 50. I can't remember who brought them to my table, but someone would be responsible for seeing them at the entrance door and seating them to a table of suitable choice. As soon as they sat down, Helen Smith, another staff member, approached the men and asked them if they wanted a drink. The man ordered 3 bottles of Beck's beer and a Diet Pepsi. I went over to the table and made sure the drinks had been ordered, and then went over to enter the drinks onto the till as we keep a computer record of the order. I will describe the men as follows. One of them, whom later introduced himself to me as Tony Tucker, he was white, mid-30s, he was very tall and had a stocky build. He had collar-length hair that was brown, long at the sides and short at the front. He was wearing a black bomber jacket and had a mobile phone, but I couldn't tell you what make. The next man, whom I shall refer to as Pat, was white, mid to late 30s, he was slightly taller than Tony and had a very large build. He had short hair that was greying but was brown in colour. He was wearing a long curved gold necklace outside his top. I can't remember his clothing, but he also had a mobile phone. The third man, whom I shall refer to as the younger one, was white, 26 to 28 years old. He was tall but not as large as the others, but he had a very well built physique. He had dark, possibly black hair that was very short in a French crop style. I remember he was wearing a very nice V-neck jumper, green and orange in colour. It stuck out as it was very nice. The fourth male I shall refer to as the quiet one, as he didn't say much and seemed very moody. He was also white. He appeared older than the others, perhaps late 30s, early 40s. He had a similar large build. He was very well built. He had wavy grey coloured hair, but I can't be sure as to the length, and stubble on his face. He was wearing a bright yellow coloured nylon bomber jacket that was zip-up. The young ones said they were all hungry and they wanted to order straight away. Tony ordered a fajita baguette, Pat ordered mushroom steak, mushroom with a baked potato, the young one ordered pasta Santa Fe with garlic bread, and the fourth male in the yellow ordered fajita baguette as well. Apart from the fourth male in the yellow jacket, the other 3 were mucking around, generally taking the piss. They kept asking me to let my hair down, and eventually after their constant pestering I did so. Tony said words to the effect of, "Oh yeah, nice, you've got to come to Berwick Manor on Friday, ask for Tony Tucker. Tony Tucker, it's easy, it rolls off the tongue." I said I might, but to be honest I had to work on Friday and needed the money. I mentioned to Tony that I knew a bloke that worked at Hollywood's nightclub in Romford, and Tony used his mobile to ring and try and find out who, but his phone wouldn't work, so he used Pat's. He finally got through and asked if they had a bouncer called Boise. Someone must have given a name of who this was, as Tony said, "What, Mick?" He laughed and said, "Sack him." He then laughed and said, "Only joking." At the end of their meal, Pat said to me, "Get Claire to ring me." I believe that Pat was asking if Claire could serve them. Claire Carey was who he meant, but she was not working that day. I said, "Has she got your number?" He said sharply, "Course she has." The bill came to around £56. Tony put down 70 quid cash, and Pat also put down a tenner. The fourth man just sat there and remained quiet throughout the meal, but he definitely seemed moody, although the other 3 were not ignoring him and didn't appear upset with him. All 4 left approximately an hour later. This left me with around £25 in tips, which I was really pleased about. I didn't see what car they went to, and this was the last time I saw them. However, I've subsequently been reading the national newspapers, and have seen Tony Pat's and the young one's pictures in the paper as being shot and killed. They were definitely the same 3 who I served that day. I've not seen the fourth man in the papers, but I believe I would recognise him again. Interestingly enough, in this statement from the waitress, she mentions there at some point in time that Tony Tucker's mobile phone wasn't working, so he asked to borrow Pat's. You'll understand why that becomes important a little bit later on in this video. But from here, many people have the false impression that they received a phone call at Timberlog Lane, and that's to meet up later that evening. But that's not correct. There's actually another place they go to after TGI Fridays. I believe that Peter Cuthbert goes his separate way, and Tucker, Tate and Rolfe head to a carpet shop on Timberlog Lane. The following statement is from Mark Harding, dated the 9th of December 1995. I'm employed at LT Carpets Limited at their site at 198 Timberlog Lane, Basildon. From there, the company sells carpets to the public. I've worked at LT Carpets for around 12 years. I've seen people that are now known as Tony Tucker, Pat Tate and Craig Rolfe on a few occasions. On the 29th of the 11th, 95, the three of them all came in together. They had a look around and then Tony Tucker made an order to recarpet a flat at 108 Mill Green, Basildon. It had already been measured and he wanted it fitted by the weekend. The total was £800. Tony paid a £100 deposit, leaving a balance of £700. The carpet was fitted on Friday the 1st of the 12th 95 by Steve Carter, who works out of our Dagenham shop. I asked him to pick up the balance of the money because I didn't want to have to try and chase up these people for the money. I haven't had any problems with any of them, but you hear stories about them, and they're all big people that you wouldn't like to argue with. After Steve had fitted the carpet, he came away without getting the money. So I had to phone up Tony Tucker to get the balance. He had given me his telephone number as 0385 317 327. I phoned him 3 times. I got through to him twice on that number. The other time the call was diverted and I left a message for him. When I spoke to Tony, he was apologetic and promised to get me the money. It's around 1:30 p.m. to 2 p.m. on Wednesday the 6th of the 12th, 1995, the same 3 people, Tucker, Tate and Rolfe, came into the yard. They came in a blue Range Rover. They all got out, just walking about, whilst Tony came into the office and paid the £700 balance by cheque. After finishing the paperwork, they then left. Tony didn't really say anything, only sorry for messing us about. The invoice has been sent over to our main office in Peacock Road, Basildon. The cheque was banked with our day's takings that evening. I'm not certain which bank they use. It's after leaving the carpet shop that this story starts to take a bit of a more bizarre twist. Now, I covered this very recently, but for the purposes of this video, it's important for me to go over it again. Tony Tucker on his mobile receives a telephone call at 14:29 from the payphone at the Sorrel Horse Inn in Ipswich. Now, this is widely believed to be the call that was summoning them to a meeting later that evening, which led to their murders. Now, what I find interesting about these calls is that we've always been told that it wasn't actually Tony Tucker who was the prime target. He wasn't the prime motivation behind this triple murder. Now, what is also interesting about these telephone calls is that we're not just looking at one here. We have the original phone call from the payphone at the Sorrel Horse Inn to Tucker's mobile. Then he appears to head to the payphone on Timberlog Lane to call this number back at 14:32. Just a few seconds later, the payphone at the Sorrel Horse Inn is again calling Tucker's mobile. Now, in the book Blogs 19, which was co-written by Darren Nichols, it's claimed in there that this is Jack Womes making these telephone calls. Coincidentally, that the actual payphone at the Sorrel Horse Inn is incredibly close to where Jack Womes was working at the time. But did Jack Womes really know Tucker? Would he be calling Tony Tucker to arrange the meeting for later that evening? There's other people that believe that this was Steele trying to contact Tucker to arrange yet again the meet for later that night. Now, how you choose to interpret these telephone calls is down to you. If you believe this is completely innocent, this is simply Michael Steele, who couldn't get hold of Pat Tate at the time, ringing Tony Tucker and organising the meet for later that evening, that's absolutely fine. Or you may wish to have a more sinister view of these phone calls. We've heard in previous videos of a slight strain in the relationship between Tucker and Tate. And did this impact on Michael Steele's plans? Now, if this is actually Michael Steele making these calls, is he arranging something with Tucker here that Tate was unaware of? It's also wholeheartedly possible that this isn't even Steele at all, or Jack Womes, making these telephone calls to Tony Tucker. Now, this is going to border on the edge of conspiracy theory, and I'm fine with that. I'm okay with that. Because what I find strange when looking at the crime scene, looking at the way that Tony Tucker's body is positioned in that Range Rover, he looks incredibly relaxed, as if he hasn't had a shock, he's not surprised by anything. But ultimately, he is also dead along with the other two members in that car. So what could possibly explain that? Could it have been that Tucker actually knew what was going on that evening and his job was to get Tate down the lane along with Steele or someone else? Could it have been that he was expecting Tate to be shot, therefore his body position is that of a relaxed person? Or could it simply be that his body position is like that because that's the way it fell after being shot with the shotgun? Now, because this case is quite open-ended in a lot of places, it does allow, I believe, for a little bit of assumption and possibly imagination in certain areas. Now, hopefully this doesn't come across as me being a conspiracy theorist or trying to push out false narratives or false ideas, but we have to ask ourselves, why is it Tucker that is receiving these telephone calls? The whole basis for this case that was put forward by the prosecution was that Michael Steele was under threat from Tate. Michael Steele was receiving threats. Tate was causing Michael Steele a great deal of trouble regarding the dud cannabis deal. It was decided that Tate had to go. Tucker doesn't even figure in this case in terms of a motive for murder. It just happened to be that Tucker was close to Tate and Tucker also got killed along with him. So why are these calls, the calls that are supposedly to actually arrange the meetup for later that evening, why are those telephone calls going to Tucker's mobile? Now, playing devil's advocate again here for one moment, could it be that Steele and Tucker actually deemed Tate to be the weak link in the chain? We had Tucker, who was a businessman to some degree. He was able to sell the product. We had Steele, who was able to import it off his own back, quite an intelligent guy. And we have Tate sort of sitting in the middle here, kind of like the muscle. But interestingly, when we take a look at Donna Garwood's statement, who was Tucker's then girlfriend, her brother actually mentioned that Tucker had said to her that Tate had done something which he was worried reflected badly on himself. Tucker was concerned by Tate's actions. Could it have been that either Tucker approached Steele and said, look, what do we need Tate for? He's causing us all this trouble. We've just had the Leah Bet situation. He's being too loud. We can work together. We can split the profits. We'll make a lot more money without him. And could it have been that that's how Steele got all three of them down the lane? This is all bearing in mind if Steele was actually involved. And as I say, it could well be, and it more than likely is, that Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were all completely unaware that night of what they were there for, and they were subsequently executed rapidly. It's also worth remembering that if this deal had any truth to it, if this deal was actually going to happen, this £1 million deal, that £1 million was worth a great deal of money, particularly back in 1995. Was Tucker the sort of greedy person who would have taken Steele up on such an offer to get rid of Tate and split the profit between them? Also, never underestimate the importance of the Leah Betts situation. Leah Betts, who died on November the 16th, 1995, and the press and the publicity that then generated. The pressure, to some degree, was really coming down on Tucker during this time period. To end this video, I'm going to leave you with an eyewitness account of the last known sighting of Tony Tucker on December the 6th, 1995. The following is a short statement from Anna Marie Whitehead. The date, the 7th of December, 1995. The time, 1500 hours. I last saw Tony at 6 PM when he was picked up from my house by Craig Rolfe in the blue Range Rover. We were supposed to be going for a meal at the Global Caf, South Street, Romford last night, but he never returned. Tony was wearing jeans, Saatchi white vest, a fleecy North Sales jumper / sweatshirt and Caterpillar boots. He was carrying a Nokia mobile phone, telephone number 0385 317 327. I later left a message on his answer machine at 8 PM. He would have had his address book / diary with him.
You have 26 messages. Hi Tony, this is Holmes Building. Please ring Derek Tyler on leads 0113 284 3553. Thank you.
Hi, I don't know if you're there. This ring up about the wages. Can you give me a ring at home? Okay, cheers, bye.
Tony, it's only me yet again. I just thought I'd ring you. Can you ring me as soon as you can? Bye. Tony, it's Mary. Can you ring me? It's really important. I need to do really important now. Thanks. Bye. Tony, can you ring me when you get in, please? Bye. Hi, Tate, it's only Mary. Can you give us a ring when you get back or when you read your messages? Bye.
Tony's Colton, can you give us a ring at Lynn's? Cheers, mate.
Tom, can you ring us back? Because he's dead. What's the officer saying? We're worried. Will you ring us straight back as soon as you can?
Tony, it's Jane and Ronnie here. Can you give us a call, please? 01303 245977 as soon as possible.
Oh, Tony, it's Pete. Your mum's been after your house telephone number. Can you ring her and let her know what it is? See you later. Hello, Tone. Could you ring me? It's Bill.
For God's sake, Tone, phone me. Speak to you later. Bye.
Hello, Tone. Give us a ring, mate. It's Mickey. Hello, Tone. Give us a ring, mate. Mickey.
Hi, anyway, Tom, when you listen to messages, could you ring me, please? Because I'm sick at the moment. I don't speak to you later. Bye. Hi, it's only me. Time's nearly 2:05, still haven't heard from you. Can you just give us a ring, please, let us know you're alright? Because at the moment I think you're dead. You just said on the telly that there's 3 men in Range Rover, and I think it's you. Bye.
Hello, Tone. It's Ian. Can you give us a ring, please?
Hi, only me. The time's now 1:45, I still haven't heard from you. Can you just give me a ring, please? My mum to let me know that you're alright. Alright, speak to you later, bye. Hi, Anne-May. Time's now 11:15. I've just got home from stables. I was going to say, just thought I'd give you a ring because I haven't heard from you. You're either alright or you're not, but I wouldn't know really. Your phone's off. Alright then, so I'll try and catch up with you later on. Bye.
Yeah, can you ring Bernie, please?
Tony, hi, it's Portugal here. It's 9 o'clock. Can you delay the pickup of your equipment until about, say, about 12 o'clock today? Because we're going to be working on it until then. It's going to be a couple of hours. I'll speak to you later. I'm at work. 515-6644. Cheerio.
Hello, babe, it's Maggie. So ring when you get a minute. Bye.
Hi, Tony, it's Mary. Just to let you know, Chris is home, so you're going to ring up about Willowbrook. He's at home with me. Speak to you soon. Bye.
Bye, Chris, ring and let me know you're getting on. I'm all ready now. Bye. Hi, babe and mate. Can you give me a ring round the flat what I used to be? Remember, 55769. Yes, ring straight away, yeah? Right, speak to you in a minute. If not, come round my other flat. I'm around Drive at the moment, but come round the flat. I'll be here for the next about 15 minutes. Right then, speak to you in a minute. Bye. Hello? Hello?
The following statement is from Philip Pullinger. dated the 8th of December 1995. At around 16:30 hours on Wednesday the 6th of December 1995, I was on duty in plain clothes in company with DC 2051 Williams in an unmarked police vehicle. At this time I left Grays Police Station and drove into Brook Road. As I did so, I saw a blue Range Rover, index number F424NPE, which was travelling in front of my vehicle. I was aware that Craig Rolfe was the user of this vehicle. The vehicle parked in Brook Road, adjacent to the front entrance to the police station. I parked my vehicle directly behind it. I got out of my vehicle, and as I did so, the driver and sole occupant of the Range Rover also got out. I recognised the driver to be a person whom I know to be Craig Rolfe. I called out to Rolfe and had a conversation with him regarding a future appointment to obtain a statement from his common-law wife, Miss Jaggers. The conversation lasted for a few seconds, and as I recollect, Rolfe was wearing a black puffy leather jacket and tracksuit bottoms. I then returned to my vehicle. I did not see where Rolfe went as he walked away from his vehicle. I then left the scene. I can be certain that the male I spoke to was Craig Rolfe. Now, many of you will know that during this time period, Craig Rolfe was a disqualified driver and the Range Rover had no tax. But really the only small piece of detail that we can take from this statement in particular is what Craig Rolfe was wearing. Now, bearing in mind this sighting is at 4:30 in the afternoon, just around 2 hours before Rolfe is actually killed, supposedly. But a lot of people say, well, how could they have been dressed like that if they were going out to this meal? Why were they wearing jeans and bomber jackets and boots? Surely they were going to go home and get changed before they went out to this meal. How could they have made the meal on time? But I think they were going to literally go as they were dressed that evening, because Craig Rolfe has obviously gone off here. He's been wearing tracksuit bottoms. He's at some point in time gone home, changed his tracksuit bottoms into jeans, and then gone off to meet Tony and Pat. I believe that the way that they're dressed, they were literally just going to go straight from Rettendon to this meal. But obviously that never happened. The next sighting of Craig Rolfe comes from Donna Jaggers, where she mentions the following in her statement. We were going out that night because they believed they were coming into money and they were going to have a pre-celebration. Craig phoned me at work in the afternoon and told me that Mickey Steele had contacted Pat Tate and said he wanted to meet with Tate and Tucker to go and look at somewhere they could land a light aircraft. Craig mentioned to me they'd been to, or were going to, I can't remember which, to TGI Friday's restaurant at Lakeside. I later found out that this had been Tate, Tucker and Craig and a person called Peter Cuthbert. Craig wanted me to have something new to wear for the evening and took me to the Lakeside Shopping Centre at 17:45. He was driving the Range Rover and left to go and pick up Tony Tucker. Craig told me that he was going because he didn't want Tony to be in a position to say that he hadn't been any part in the arranging. I also understood that Craig was going to collect Tony Tucker from his house and they were going to meet Tate and Steele later. I did not have contact from Craig, Tate or Tucker after this point. Okay, now if we go a little bit further back in Donna Jaggers' statement, there's something that confuses me. It's confused me ever since I've read it and it still confuses me to this day. But just reading that part at the bottom could actually tie in with what I'm about to question here. Now, earlier on in her statement, she appears to be concerned about Craig's involvement. She tells him, look, I don't want you to have anything to do with this. This is getting out of control. Craig says to Donna the following words. He told me that Steele didn't know he was going to be driving, and he convinced me that he wasn't as heavily involved as the other two in what was going to happen. Now, what she is referring to here is the ripping off of Steele. The fact that they're going to get this consignment, they're going to cut it up into impure, then give it back to Steele. Now, when you look at Darren Nichols' statement, he also mentions that Steele is going to meet only Tate. Also mentioned at the bottom of Donna Jaggers' statement is exactly the same thing. That Craig is going off to meet Tucker and they're going to meet Pat and Steele later. Now, when I read that part about Donna Jaggers being told by Craig, look, he doesn't know I'm going to be driving, I'm not as heavily involved as the other two, don't worry about it. What I took from that is that he was going to be nearby in the Range Rover whilst this deal was taking place, or whilst this robbery of the consignment was taking place. Steele wouldn't even know that he was ever there. That's the impression I get when I read that part of the statement. Not the fact that Steele doesn't know I'm going to be driving. Oh, surprise, here I am at the halfway house. That's not what I get when reading that statement. What I pick up from that statement is that Craig is saying, I would have been in the Range Rover, out of sight. Steele's not going to know I was even there. I'm not as heavily involved as Tate and Tucker. They're going to be robbing this consignment. I'm going to be there in the vehicle to drive them away. And that's what I get from that statement. I certainly don't think it's a case that he was going to turn up with Tucker and Tate at the halfway house, and then Steele's going to get in the vehicle and think, oh, Craig's driving. I wasn't expecting that. Now, this is where it gets a little bit confusing, as we have two individuals who claim that Michael Steele was going to meet Pat Tate separately. We have Darren Nichols' official version of events, stating that when he got into the vehicle, when he got into the Hilux with Mick, he said he was going to meet Pat for a deal. We also have Donna Jagger's statement, where she claims that Craig had told her that he was going to pick up Tucker and he was going to meet up with Tate later on in the evening. Now, the problem that we have is that we have the eyewitness account from Tony Tucker's common law wife that he left his property around 6 o'clock. He was picked up by Rolfe, but there was no one home at Tate's address. We don't have any independent witnesses claiming, or stating I should say, that Tate got into the vehicle with Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe. I guess the best eyewitness account we have is from the tyre fitter leaving work. It's in his statement that he says he sees the Range Rover. He knows Craig Rolfe from school when they used to go to school together. He could identify Rolfe being the driver, Tucker in the front passenger seat, and a large man in the rear between the two front seats. He couldn't state whether this was Tate due to the fact that it was dark, but he could definitely clearly recognise Craig Rolfe driving and Tony Tucker in the passenger seat. Where things get even more confusing is the fact that in Sarah Saunders' official statement, or I should say in her police interviews, she was adamant that she was told that they were going to meet Mad Mick Bowman first. Before meeting Mickey Steele, they were going to meet Mad Mick Bowman. Now, she claimed that she heard that through, I don't know whether it's Donna Jaggers or Donna Jaggers told someone else and it got back to Sarah Saunders, but this doesn't appear anywhere in Donna Jaggers' official statement. So it's strange. I mean, obviously it's more than likely that it's Tate who is seen by this tyre fitter driving down the road and when they're on their way to the halfway house pub. But we can't be 100% sure. There is a very small possibility that Rolfe and Tucker were in the Range Rover and they met up with Tate later on that evening. What makes this case equally difficult but also intriguing is the telephone evidence. Now, obviously back in 1995, the technology just wasn't there to be able to pinpoint people's locations. As I've said in many previous other videos, really all we have is a very approximate location for where these individuals are on the evening of December the 6th. Now, what we have in its entirety is Rolfe without a mobile telephone. He didn't take his phone with him on December the 6th. We have quite sparse telephone information from Tucker, and we have fairly sparse information regarding Tate's mobile phone. So there is a slim possibility, as I say, that Tate may have met up with Steele beforehand and then met up with Tucker and Rolfe later on. I guess that's why I find this case just so interesting, even after 2 years of looking into it. It's the fact that the evidence that we have is by no means scientific. It's by no means 100% proven. You need to remember that regardless of whether you believe that Steele and Wombs are guilty of these crimes, everything was literally based upon the word of Darren Nichols. If you believe Darren Nichols, you believe his version of events, then of course you believe that Steele and Wombs are wholeheartedly guilty of these murders. But the fact we have this sort of telephone evidence, which is quite ambiguous, it's quite open to interpretation. We have the different sightings of a Range Rover being seen with a white car at different locations. That's what I enjoy about this case, is that it's not an open and shut case. If you look into all of the statements, it seems to be quite open-ended in places. And I'm certainly not putting this forward, this theory forward of Tate possibly meeting up with Steele first as, you know, the gospel truth or anything like that. It's just simply a possibility. Because we don't have, as I said earlier, any eyewitness stating that Tate got into that vehicle with Rolfe and Tucker, the simple fact is no one will ever really know the truth. Now, one of the last parts I want to move on to is Craig Rolfe's body position when he's found in the Range Rover on December the 7th. Now, this has to be literally one of the most talked about points in this entire case. And it wasn't until, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago that I came across something in the Summing Up in Court document which actually answered the question. Now, a lot of people, they look at the crime scene photographs, they particularly pay attention to the ones taken back at the police pound when they've recovered the Range Rover. And a lot of people say, well, why is Craig Rolfe's left foot on the brake? This is something I covered in a separate video, which is on the channel, so do feel free to check that out. But the reason, if anyone hasn't seen that video, the reason why Craig Rolfe's left foot is on the brake is not the fact that he's braking that's the issue here. It's the fact that he's braking with his left foot, which a lot of people deem to be unnatural. The problem arose actually is when they got the vehicle back to the police pound, they actually had to reposition the bodies. They had to move the steering wheel, they had to reposition the bodies as they had moved in transit from the crime scene back to the police pound. It was written in, as I say, the summing up in court document, that there had to be some adjusting of the bodies, there had to be some moving of the bodies, and that is why Craig Rolfe's left foot is on the brake. It may well have been, and more than likely was, that his right foot was on the brake when they were actually discovered. The problem that we have is that we don't actually have any photographs of the interior of the Range Rover before it was actually recovered back to the police pound. And then we move on to the actual shooting itself. Now, this is yet another open-ended topic. A lot of people say that Tate was shot first to subdue him, and a lot of people say that Rolfe was shot first because he was the driver, and some people even say that Tucker was shot first. The truth of the matter, as with a lot of things in this case, is there's simply no way to prove who was shot first. That can be best used as an example when again looking at the summing up in court documents, where the forensic experts and the ballistic experts couldn't even agree on who was shot first. There's even a possibility that one of the bullet wounds went through one of the victims and hit the other. So the truth is, as I say, we just simply don't know. Now, from my perspective, a common sense perspective, I guess you could say, is I would imagine that Rolfe was the first person to be shot. The reason for that is because obviously he's driving the vehicle. He's the person that can get those other two occupants out of there. Really, he's the first person that needs to be taken care of. So in my opinion, the way that it's happened is that Rolfe is shot first, then Tucker, then Tate is shot in the abdomen. And what's interesting about this point in time is we're supposedly looking at someone who is committing a murder for the first time, as in Jack Womes. But whoever has committed this crime, whoever has committed this murder, whoever's pulled the trigger, has shot Tate in the abdomen, and they haven't panicked. There hasn't been, someone firing as quickly as they can and just trying to get this over and done with. Whoever's committed this crime has fired that shot into the abdomen of Tate. They've then calmly walked around the front of the vehicle to the near side rear window where they've taken aim at Pat Tate's head and then shot him again. So what I'm getting from that is that this is someone who has still got quite a good presence of mind. They're not, as I say, they're not panicking, they're not rushing, they're not overcome with adrenaline and firing off as many shots as they can and just making sure that they're dead. This is a clinical execution. Now, just to leave this video with a little bit more spice and controversy, we're going to leave you with an eyewitness account, a statement from a barman in 1996 who comes forward to the police and claims that he serves Craig Rolfe at 8 p.m. on December the 6th, over an hour after their supposed deaths. I'll leave you with this statement, and I'll see you all again in the next video. Cheers. The following statement comes from Stuart Armstrong, dated the 8th of the 3rd, 1996. Around the 10th of the 10th, 95, I started working as a barman at the Carpenter's Arms, situated off the A130 at Rolfe. The pub itself I would describe as a locals pub, with it being very cliquey. There is only the one bar area situated inside. There is not any video monitoring system inside the pub, basically because there is never any trouble. On either Tuesday the 5th of December 95 or Wednesday the 6th of December 95, and I think it was more than probably the Wednesday, I was left to mind the pub on my own. Around 1600 hours I started work. It was not very busy during the afternoon and into the evening. However, around 2000 hours it was very quiet in the bar area, in fact quieter than normal, when two men entered the bar. Both men approached the bar and I will describe them as best I can. One of them I shall refer to as male 1. I will describe this man as white, 30 years old, around 5'7" tall. He had a stocky build. He had brown hair that was cut very short and brushed down straight, but appeared to be receding. I believe he may have been wearing a green jacket, but I'm not certain. The other male I cannot describe in any detail, other than that he was also white but was also taller than male 1. Male 1 asked me for a bottle of Budweiser beer and a bottle of Two Dogs alcoholic lemonade. What stuck in my mind was that it was company policy to pour any bottled drinks into a glass, and as I started to pour the Budweiser into the glass, male 1 got agitated and said he wanted it kept in the bottle. I told him I couldn't and he accepted this, although he wasn't happy. Both men then went over to a table situated in the corner of the bar area near the fruit machine. Around 20 minutes later, both men left. I didn't hear any conversation between them. I was glad when they left because I was on my own. It was not until the following week that I read the Evening Echo newspaper, and in particular an article on a triple murder that had happened in Rettendon. To my surprise, one of the 3 photos of the 3 deceased I immediately recognised to be male 1 who had been drinking in the pub. The name of the person, according to the paper, was Craig Rolfe. Although I cannot describe male 2 in any detail, I can say that it was neither of the other 2 pictures in the paper of the 3 dead men. I would not be able to recognise male 2 again, and have no further information regarding his description. The following statement is from Barry Dorman, dated the 8th of December 1995. I'll describe my relationship with Pat as friendly, although we did not socialise outside of work. It was around this time that Pat started talking about a man called Tony Tucker, who he said he had met at a nightclub where Tony was working as a doorman. I had never met Tony, but I can remember Pat talking about him. It was around this time that I was told that Pat had been shot and he was in Basildon Hospital. I went to the hospital with Graham Law to see Pat, and when I was there, Pat's brother Russell turned up. Although I'd known Russell as a car trader, I've had very little to do with him. We only stayed with Pat for around 10 minutes, as I merely wanted to let him know that I had heard and passed on my good wishes. Although I had this regular contact with Pat and we had built up a trust between us, he never told me any details of what he was involved in other than to do with cars. He knew I'd previously been in the Metropolitan Police Service for a short period, and I was also wary of Pat with his volatile temperament. I was always careful of what I asked Pat in case he thought I was trying to get information from him. I was later told that the man I had met at Pat's party, Stephen Ellis, was possibly involved in the shooting, although I do not know whether there is any truth in this. I've never asked Pat about the shooting or his other businesses, as I know he would be suspicious of my reasons. I later became aware that the police had found a number of items in Pat's possession at hospital, and as a result he was returned to prison. I believe the items included a handgun, a quantity of cocaine and some tablets. I did not go and see Pat in prison, but I was asked by Pat through Sarah Saunders to dispose of his current vehicle, which was a black 928 S2 Porsche, index AN0928S. I took possession of the vehicle from Sarah, and after having some work done on it, I put it up for sale on my front for around £8,995. When I had the car, I received a phone call from Pat in prison telling me to keep the money if I sold the car and not give it to Sarah or anyone else. I had the vehicle for a couple of months, and during this time I took 2 deposits on the car, but the sales fell through. When I took the deposits, I used to put a sold sign on the vehicle, and when I did this I received a visit from the man called Tony Tucker. At this time I think I'd met Tucker once or twice when he had attended the car front with Pat before he was returned to prison. When he came to my garage, Tucker told me to give him the money. Although I had heard about Tony Tucker and I did not want to cross him, I was more concerned about crossing Pat, and therefore I told Tony that I would not give him the money. When I stood my ground and I told him what Pat had said, Tony seemed to accept it and left my garage. I kept the car for a couple of months but could not sell it. I therefore returned it to Sarah Saunders. In this time I only saw Tony Tucker once more when he came up to my car front on a horse and asked me if I had any luck selling it. At this time I had become aware of Tony moving into a house in Fobbing High Road with a large plot of land. I had a couple of phone calls from Pat whilst he was in prison, but they appeared to be merely for a chat rather than anything specific. The next time I saw Pat was when he came down to my car front after he'd been released from prison. This would have been at the end of October 95, beginning of November 95. I believe at this time he was on his own and we had a general chat about domestic and general matters. At this time he appeared quite level-headed and normal. My next contact with Pat and Tony Tucker was when they came to my garage after Pat had had an accident in Tony's black Porsche. The vehicle was badly damaged and Pat was asking me to sort it out as cheaply as possible. The vehicle was brought to the One Tree Hill site, and my daughter spent a lot of time trying to locate cheap second-hand spares for the repair. I also arranged for quotes to carry out the bodywork. As a result of the Porsche repairs, I began to have virtual day-to-day contact with either Pat, Tony or both. The majority of the time they were together and were accompanied by a younger man called Craig. At that time I had a blue Range Rover 3.5 Vogue SE, index F424NPE on my forecourt, as I'd recently taken that in as part exchange. I had purchased this vehicle from a Mr. Graham Hurston of Kingston Road, Stanford-le-Hope, on the 2nd of the 11th, 95. I can produce a copy of the purchase invoice for this transaction as my exhibit BTD/1. As Tony Tucker was now without a vehicle, he and Pat showed interest in purchasing the Range Rover which I had for sale at £10,995. After some negotiation, I agreed to sell it to them for £9,800, but I knew that neither Pat or Tony would be able to get finance on the vehicle. When I pointed this out, Tony stated that his friend would be buying it on his behalf, but he would be using it. I agreed to accept a £2,000 deposit and put the remainder on finance. A friend of Tony's, a man who gave his name as Mr. P. Cuthbert of Templewood Road, Hadley, Essex, then attended my site and provided sufficient details for me to complete the finance agreement. I was handed £2,000 in cash, and at this time I'm unable to say which one of them gave it to me. They then took the keys from me and drove the vehicle away from my forecourt. I completed a sales invoice for the transaction and showed the purchaser as Tony Tucker. I can produce a copy of this invoice as my exhibit BTD/2. I then sent off the completed finance agreement and received my cheque from the company for the balance. I am still in possession of the registration document for the vehicle, which I can produce as exhibit BTD/3. The finance company would have issued a pay-in book to Mr. P. Cuthbert to enable the monthly payments to be made. This book would have been sent to Cuthbert's home address. The Range Rover was taken by Pat and Tony on the 14th of the 11th, 95. From that day when Pat, Tony and Craig visited my car front, they would be using the Range Rover. Craig would normally be the driver with Pat in the front passenger seat and Tony in the back. As stated, I had a number of visits from them inquiring about the progress with the Porsche repairs. I can remember during one of their visits, Tony was really annoyed and stated that they were trying to link him to the supply of the ecstasy tablet which killed the girl called Leah Betts. He stated that he knew who had supplied it as he'd been told by one of the doormen. He also stated that he had made some checks and he knew that the girl regularly took tablets and that she didn't even live with her father. He was really ranting and raving to Pat about it, and I heard him say that it was only because her dad was a policeman that such a fuss was being made. During the morning of Wednesday the 6th of the 12th, 95, I was at the car front when Pat, Tony, Craig and Mr. P. Cuthbert arrived in the Range Rover. I would describe Cuthbert as a male, white, 5'10" to 5'11", late 30s, reasonably fit build. I've been told that he is a ceiling fixer. The four of them came into the office and I was handed by one of them the pay-in book relating to the Range Rover finance, and between them they produced £321 and 40p in cash. I was asked by one of them, I can't remember who, to keep the book and remind them when the payments were due. I agreed to do this as it was in my interest to make sure the finance was paid. I'd also been told by Pat and Tony at the time of purchasing the vehicle that they intended to pay it off in one lump sum fairly quickly. I paid this sum into the Barclays Bank at Pitsea Broadway the following day. Sometime during an earlier meet with Pat, he had asked me whether I had a suitable vehicle for him to give to Sarah Saunders. He told me there had been a lot of problems between them and he wanted to give her a car to get her off his back. I told him I had a VW Passat on the forecourt which I had taken in as part exchange on the 25th of the 11th, 95. I showed him the vehicle, which was metallic green in colour and had a registration number F120GGF. He agreed to take it for a test drive and later we agreed on a price of £1,800 for the vehicle. I can produce a purchase invoice for this VW Passat as my exhibit BTD/5. I left my garage forecourt around 1700 to 1730 on Wednesday the 6th of December 1995, intending to play my friend Keith Moore at squash. At this time my daughter and an employee, Mickey Stenning, were at the car front. En route to squash I received a phone call from Mickey Stenning stating that Herc, which is my pet name for Pat Tate due to his size, had arrived at the car front to collect the VW Passat. Pat then came onto the phone and told me that he would still take the vehicle even though he didn't need it as he had a bust-up with Sarah Saunders. I told him he didn't have to take it, but he insisted that he would. He told me that he would pay for the vehicle in the morning as he had a lump of money coming. As a result, I agreed to Pat taking the vehicle that night, which he did. The following morning, Thursday the 7th of December 95, I returned to my car site at around 9 AM. Between 11 and 12 midday, I was at the site talking to a customer when a female approached me and called me by name. I did not recognise her, and as I was talking, she appeared to move away. A short while later, I returned to my office and the same woman approached me and said words to the effect of, "Bow, can they trace the Range Rover back to you?" Not knowing her, I said, "What Range Rover?" And she replied, "The one that Tony's been using." At that, I realised that she was referring to the Range Rover being used by Pat Tate and Tony Tucker. I asked her why, and she just replied, "Oh, nothing." She then walked out of the office. I would describe this woman as female, white, 5'3", slim build, tanned freckled face with mousy straight hair. I believe that she is the girlfriend of Tony Tucker. I was obviously concerned about why she had come in and asked that question, so I immediately tried to contact Pat Tate on his mobile telephone. When I called the number 0585429316, I got no reply, so I tried his other mobile number. When this was answered, it was by a female who I did not recognise. I asked to speak to the big man, and she said he was out on a job. I asked if everything was alright, and she just said yeah. I then tried to phone Tony on his mobile, but all I got was Tony's answer phone. I did not leave a message. I then tried to phone Tony's home phone, but that was unobtainable. I've not seen Tony Tucker, Pat Tate, Craig or Mr. Cuthbert since. Purely as background information, I'm aware that Pat, Tony and Craig were heavily into bodybuilding and in their quest to increase their size were injecting substances. I believe that all three of them used a Progress gym for an hour each morning. Okay, so obviously a very detailed statement there. Now, I think Barry's always come across incredibly well in the documentaries that I've seen. I've never spoken to the guy personally, but when I listen to parts of the documentary, especially the Truth documentary, he always comes across incredibly well. He's obviously someone that knew Pat Tate for a lot of years, and this statement is incredibly interesting, particularly the part where Pat is in prison. He calls up Barry and says, "Look, if you sell this Porsche, please keep the money. I don't want it going to Sarah. I don't want it to go into anybody. I need you to keep hold of this money until I get out." Now, at some stage, this Porsche has had a deposit put down on it. Tucker has obviously driven past and seen the sold sign on this Porsche and gone in to see Barry to collect the money. Now, this all ties in with a level of mistrust here between Tucker and Tate. The more I read these statements, the more I read into this, the more I can see that the cracks are appearing. Tate has obviously felt concerned, or maybe it's just simply paranoia, but he's calling up his good friend there to say, "Look, don't let anybody touch this money. No one, not Tony, not Craig, not Sarah, not anybody." And what's Tony done? He's seen that that car's sold, and the first thing that he's done is rock up at the car front and demanded the money off of Barry. It does make you wonder exactly what their relationship was like towards the end of their lives. Also remember that shortly after this period, or around this period I should say, Tony Tucker turns up with this massive house in Fobbing. Okay, so let's just stop very briefly and just clarify what we've got here, because this is not an isolated incident. Now, Pat Tate is recalled to prison after being in hospital and being found with the handgun in his bedclothes. He's returned to prison, and during his spell in prison, he gives full financial control of his finances over to Tony Tucker. It's during this time period that it's Tony Tucker's responsibility to pay Sarah Saunders a set amount of money each month. Now, sometime during that spell in prison, Pat Tate has a change of heart. He contacts Michael Steele and says to Michael Steele, "Look, I'm not happy about Tony Tucker dealing with my finances. I'm not happy with what he's spending the money on. Can you take full financial control from him? And I want you, Michael Steele, to pay Sarah Saunders a certain amount of money each month." Now, this version of events came from Michael Steele, but it was also fully backed up in Sarah Saunders' police interview. It's also backed up in terms of this statement here. The fact that Tate was in prison, he said, "Look, I want you to keep all the money for when I get out. I don't want you to give it to anybody." And then Tony's come along and tried to take that money from Barry Dorman. What we also had was a statement from Donna Garwood's brother, Donna Garwood being the then girlfriend of Tony Tucker. Her brother said in his statement that actually Tony had said to her that he was concerned about something that Pat had done which reflected badly on him. He was quite paranoid, he was staying in more, he was quite jumpy. And these three statements from three separate individuals are telling a very similar story. There's a level here of distrust between Tate and Tucker in November, December 1995. Now, what is important to cover in this video is also Tate's real demeanour on December the 6th. It's quite interesting when we look at the early parts of December the 6th when Tucker, Tate, Rolfe and Cuthbert approached the car front to pay off the finance agreement. It's almost like the three of them are scrambling around to come up with £300. Yet later on in the evening when Tate is talking to Dorman about buying this VW, he's almost quite carefree. He says to Dorman, look, I don't need the car anymore. I've fallen out with Sarah again, but don't worry, I'm still going to buy it. I'm coming into a load of money. I'll be back in the morning to pay it off. The mention of coming into money is also spoken about by Barry Dorman in this following passage, where he states the following. I'd also been told by Pat and Tony at the time of purchasing the Range Rover that they intended to pay it off in one lump sum fairly quickly. Now, in my opinion, December the 6th is the day of the deal. It's the day that Tate thinks he's going to come into some money. Now, what doesn't make any sense is the fact that the call at 2:30 p.m. to Tucker's mobile is supposedly the one where they say, look, there's been a delay, there's snow on the ground, but we're going to take a look at where the plane's going to land in the future. Tate, in my mind, believes he's coming into money on December the 6th. This isn't a dry run. This isn't somewhere they're going to look at something that's going to be happening in a week's time. Tate is telling Dorman in this very statement he'll be back tomorrow with £2,000 to pay off this car that he doesn't even need. In my opinion, Tate feels like he's coming into hundreds of thousands of pounds, not maybe 10 or 20 grand, but hundreds of thousands. Now put yourself in Tate's position for one moment. If you'd had that phone call, you'd heard from Tucker at 2:30 p.m. that there'd been a delay, that there was snow on the ground, they wouldn't be receiving the money as quickly as they thought they would, that a deal had been put off for a few days. Would you really be speaking to someone at 5:30, having been armed with that information, and then be telling them, look, don't worry, I'm coming into a lump of cash, I'll be back in the morning to pay off the £2,000. I don't need the car, fallen out with Sarah again, but I'm still going to take it off you, I've messed you about, I'll give you £2,000, it's not a problem. Would you really be doing that? In my mind, as I've just said, Tate was convinced that he was coming into money on December the 6th. Now just to go over again what is said in that statement here, it states the following. En route to Squash, I received a phone call from Mickey Stenning stating that Herc, which was my pet name for Pat Tate due to his size, had arrived at the car front to collect the VW Passat. Pat then came onto the phone and told me that he would still take the vehicle even though he didn't need it, as he'd had a bust-up with Sarah Saunders. I told him that he didn't need to take it, but he insisted that he would. He told me that he would pay for the vehicle in the morning as he had a lump of money coming. As a result, I agreed to Pat taking the vehicle that night, which he did. It just doesn't make any sense. The whole notion of this murder, the fact that Steele is showing them where this lane is, he's going to show them where this plane's going to land. These people think they're coming into money this night. I'm sure of it. That's why they've got this meal booked. Why would you be having the meal for a pre-celebration for money you haven't even received yet? The absolute notion of that is just ridiculous. In my opinion, they thought they were going to have the deal that night. There was some sort of deal going to take place, and they thought they were going to hit the big time on December the 6th. Now, when you take a look at this from a different angle, it also ties in with Darren Nichols' original version of events for Mickey Steele going to meet Pat Tate for a deal. Now, what doesn't make any sense is why these three individuals, as in Tucker, Tate and Rolfe, why these three individuals would travel down that lane unarmed. Now, obviously, we have no way of telling for certain if they were armed or not, but it's more than likely the case that they weren't. So why would they be down that lane? We know there's a gun range there. Could they have been lured down there on the pretense of buying weaponry for a later armed robbery that was going to take place after the meal? I don't know. But one thing is for certain is that I'm getting the impression here that Tate was convinced, absolutely convinced, that he was coming into a great sum of money on December the 6th. Now from here we move on to the murders themselves. It was at 18:44 where Sarah Saunders calls Pat Tate, and they have a phone call which lasts almost 4 minutes in duration. Now this isn't the impression we get when we take a look at Sarah Saunders' police statement, where she claims that the telephone call was actually very brief, that she just spoke to Pat and he said, I can't really speak at the moment, I'm with some people. But he seemed quite relaxed, quite upbeat, quite jovial, and he said he would get in contact with Sarah Saunders the following day. Now, what Sarah herself found quite strange about that phone call is that if he was with Michael Steele, she can't understand why Pat wouldn't have simply said, I'm with Mickey and the boys at the moment, I'll call you back tomorrow. Because that wasn't what Pat Tate actually said. His words were to the effect of, I can't talk at the moment, I'm with some people, everything's fine, I'll give you a call back tomorrow and we'll sort it out. Anyway, what is most important about this telephone call, other than the content of the call itself, is the fact that the official narrative, the official version of events for these murders as put forward by the prosecution, was that the Range Rover entered the lane shortly before 7 p.m. It travelled down the cold, dark, lonely farm track. It reached the 5-bar locked gate. Craig Rolfe pulled up to the gate and the rear passenger said, just wait there, I'm going to open the gate. He got out the back and then Jack Womes appeared from nearby bushes and executed the 3 men. Now this is where things start to get a little bit more confusing. As in Darren Nichols' official testimony, he claims that he has a conversation with Michael Steele after these murders, where Michael Steele tells him that they are travelling down the lane in question when Pat Tate's phone springs to life. His phone starts to ring and it's Sarah Saunders at the other end of the call. Steele remarks at being rather paranoid and concerned that Tate's going to mention that he's with Steele in the vehicle, but luckily he doesn't. He remarks to Darren that it was lucky that he didn't stay on with Mickey at the moment because he didn't know how he had stopped Jack Womes from executing the 3 men. Now we know that this can't be true because the call lasts almost 4 minutes in duration. So the actual distance from the start of the lane to the lock gate is no more than a 10 or 15 second drive. So clearly what has happened here is that either this call originated way before they got to the lane in question, or they were waiting down the lane for a few minutes before being executed. Now what is quite annoying is that we have a very rudimentary mistake by the investigating officer interviewing Sarah Saunders, as he fails to ask her if she believed that the vehicle was moving at the time of the phone call. He didn't say to Sarah, did it sound like they were moving? Did they sound like they were in a car? Did he sound like he was with other people? Could you hear noise in the background? None of these questions were put to Sarah Saunders. So we have no idea if the Range Rover was in transit at this time or stationary. Now to conclude this video, I'm going to leave you with a statement which you may not have heard before. This is from a lady by the name of Susan Carey, who was the mother of one of Pat Tate's girlfriends. She was one of the last people to speak to Pat Tate before his murder. The following statement is from Susan Carey, dated the 6th of February 1996. I live with my family in the Eastwood area. I have 4 daughters, the youngest of whom is Claire. Claire is 23 years old. On and off, Claire lives at home but spends time with her boyfriend. At present, Claire works at TGI Fridays at the Lakeside Complex in West Thurrock. However, she had previously worked in Southend at a restaurant called Sellers, and I believe that Kim Webber was the owner. It was through Claire's association with the restaurant and Kim that she became acquainted with Pat Tate. My first impression of Pat was only from what Claire had told me, and I first became aware of Claire actually seeing Pat when he was in hospital having been shot in the arm. I'd only ever met Pat once when he came to the door at my house calling for Claire. I was aware that Pat also served some time in prison and that he would keep in contact with Claire when he got out. It was only a couple of months ago when he must have been released because I started getting phone calls from Pat. He would be very polite and ask for Claire, and more often than not she wasn't in, so he would apologise for troubling me and ask that I leave a message for Claire to contact him. I approached Claire and at one stage voiced my concern because I didn't really want my daughter getting involved with him because of his past. Claire assured me that she wasn't. The last time I had any contact with Pat Tate was on Wednesday the 6th of December 1995 when he phoned me at home at around 6 p.m. He had rung several times earlier in the day asking for Claire, and on the final occasion, Claire still wasn't back from work. It was then that Pat said that he had to go out for around half an hour, but asked that I tell Claire to hang on as he would be back. Pat didn't sound concerned or worried on the phone. The only other contact I had was later that evening from Claire herself, saying that she'd been waiting outside Pat's for ages and he hadn't turned up, so she was going to go back to her boyfriend's. When Pat last rang, he sounded like he was at home because he said, "Please tell her to hold on." He explained that he was thinking about leaving a note on his door for Claire, but didn't know whether he would bother. Whenever Pat rang up, he would always introduce himself as Pat Tate. I had no doubts that it was not him.
Pat
not here to take your call right now, so I'll leave a message and he'll get back to you.
Tate, yeah, sorry. Hello? I'll mobile, mate. Hi, Pat, it's Ian. It's Tuesday, about 3:30. I'm in Kent at the moment. Perhaps you'll give me a call. The number is 01634 660811. Cheers.
I don't want Pat, I want Sarah. Give us a ring, Sarah, it's so. Bye.
Pat, you in, mate? It's Nicky. Can you give me a ring, mate, on 0973 396 781? Cheers, mate.
Pat, it's Lorraine, Kinsley. Could you give us a call, please, sometime today or tonight? 01268 759 235 or on Kim's mobile 0850 444 186. Thank you, dearie. Just wanted to ask you something. Bye.
Hi, Pat, it's Ian. It's Friday lunchtime. I'm in the car. Perhaps you can give me a ring. 0831 244 657. Thanks.
Hello, Pat, you there? It's Sarah. Hello? Hello? I'm at Mum's at the moment. She wants to bring the dog round, so, can you ring up someone and let us know what's happening? Because I can't get on the mobile, I tried. Can you let us know what's happening, alright? Thanks, bye.
Pat, it's Angus. It's Friday. I'm not going to be able to make it. I'll phone you next week. Bye. Could pop round and see Val this afternoon. She'll be on about 1:30. Alright, cheers.
Hello, Sto. It's only Sto. I'll speak to you later. Alright then, bye.